Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on confidently presenting your qualitative results chapter. My name is Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research analyst and mentor here at Statistics Solutions. Our contact information is here on this first slide. But we are a full service dissertation consulting company, and we are here to assist graduate students with really any phase of the dissertation journey. So from things like topic development all the way through to your final discussion chapter. Okay, so you'll see our contact information throughout the presentation. And then I have a final slide with this as well. But do keep in mind as we go through that we offer a complimentary 30-minute consultation to talk with one of us about how we can help you with your dissertations. So get to know you a little bit better, get to know your projects a little bit better, and see how we can really, where the trouble spots are at and how we can provide the best support for you. So that information is available. Again, I'm Rachel. I also have Isades here with me, and she will be sort of helping me out on the technical end. And if there are any questions that come up during the webinar, she will be answering any of those related to our consulting services. If there are questions that are more topical related to the webinar today, we will have time for a brief question and answer session at the end. So I will address those for everyone at the end of the session. You will also receive a copy of this webinar. So that should be going out, I think, tomorrow. So, don't worry about that. If you miss anything, you'll get a copy of that soon. All right. So for those still filing in, my name is Rachel. I am a senior qualitative research analyst mentor here at Statistics Solutions. And so I work with a lot of dissertation doctoral students on their qualitative dissertations. This webinar is Confidently Present Your Qualitative Research chapter. On this slide, you will see the main components of a qualitative results chapter. And this is something that I have compiled over the years in working with doctoral students and what I see most commonly required of them to include in the chapter 4. So this is pulled, again, it's a compilation from a lot of different schools, but I can guarantee that if you hit each of these sections, each of these components in your results chapter, you have a thorough results chapter. So we will touch on each of these in this presentation. Okay. So starting off with your introduction. Your introductory paragraph, you want to remind your reader of the research problem and the purpose of your study. What was it that you were trying to accomplish? Okay, remind the reader of your research questions. So what I really like to think about doing here is holding my reader's hand as we move through the dissertation. Okay, we don't want our readers to necessarily be shuffling pages and going back and forth to other chapters. You want just a concise recap of what it is you're trying to do, presented at the very beginning of your results chapter. Okay, so here's the need for the study. This is the problem. Here's the purpose. Here are the research questions that you were trying to address. And then it's in this chapter where you present the results that help you address those research questions. Okay, and so in the introduction to somewhere, you should have a preview of what is to come in the chapter. It's not a guessing game for anyone. You don't want to leave it to surprise for your readers what you're going to talk about in the chapter. It's just, here's what I'm going to talk about, and then you move into talking about that. So your research setting, you have probably already talked about a little bit in your chapter 3. And before we really get going with this, one thing that I should sort of clarify is there is a lot of this that will look very familiar to what you did in your methods chapter. So I may slip and say chapter 3, and I realize that not everyone's chapter 3 is their methods chapter, but I most commonly work with a sort of more typical 5-chapter dissertation where chapter 3 is the methods and chapter 4 is the results. And so in chapter 3, you've already outlined in your methods chapter what you planned to do to collect data, to analyze data, who your participants were. You've already talked about this. Chapter 4, you're going to revisit this, but you're going to revisit it in a way that makes it clear what changed, what actually happened. Okay, so you think of your results chapter, and I know that students have a hard time thinking through the methods chapter sometimes because it's all hypothetical at the point at which they're writing it. You know, you are thinking about something that hasn't happened yet. You're planning for something that hasn't happened yet. And this can really cause us to spin our wheels when we get hung up in the what if we find ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, when we're collecting data and everything just kind of backfires. Okay. And that's totally fine. That happens. It has happened, right? A lot of you are probably in this space right now, and just know that every other participant in this webinar is also in the same space. Chapter 4 is where you talk about the real life, the way it went. So results chapter is the actual reality, and the methods chapter was the in a perfect world, here's what I was going to do. Okay, so methods chapter 4 is where you outline here's what actually happened, right? And this is really important because you want your reader to understand the context for your study. It's totally fine if things changed from your methods chapter. That happens all the time. You just have to talk about what changed and how it may have impacted your research. So for the setting, you talk about where you conducted the research. Okay, so maybe it's not in a private school office, one-on-one, face-to-face anymore. Maybe you had to do a one-on-one interview over Zoom instead. Talk about that. Talk about that here, you know. Anything that may have influenced the research. So, you know, sure, there's a chance that when you were interviewing someone over Zoom, you maybe can't catch the same body language that you would notice if you were sitting in the same room as that person. Okay, so that might influence your research. That might influence your results. And that's okay. So you just talk about that. Any conditions that maybe influenced your participants. Okay, so what if you had planned to, again, you know, interview your participants in person, face to face? Well, so maybe those interviews now got changed to Zoom interviews, and you've decided that it's a sensitive topic, whatever it is your study is about. And so you don't require that they are on the camera. So that may impact your study, as I said, in that you may not have the body language to work with in terms of interpreting what they are saying. But what if it makes your participants feel more comfortable? And so they're actually more willing to share with you because you can't see them than they would be if you were in person and face to face. So that's something else that might influence, in this case, your participants, right? So you want to talk about that. Anything that may impact your interpretation of your results, you just talk about what were the changes from what you planned to do based on your methods chapter to what actually happened in reality in your results chapter. It's also a good idea in your results chapter to provide demographic information about your participants. And this doesn't need to be every single possible demographic characteristic that you can think of about your participants, but certainly any of the characteristics that are relevant to the study, you would want to talk about in this chapter, in this section. So demographics are often really, they lend themselves to nice tables, right? Just to present concise information. It's easy to see, you know, this is participant one, and you know, here's their gender and here's their education level, and whatever those salient characteristics are specific to your study. Okay. And so if you use a table, then you just want to introduce that table, what the table is showing, present the table, and then talk about it a little bit, right? And this holds true for really anything in your dissertation, any table, figure, graphic, anything like that in any of your chapters. Don't just pop it in there and not say anything about it, okay? But demographics, again, really, you know, nice in table format so that your reader has a sense of who your participants were and why this information is important for understanding your results. Why was it important that you interview people with these characteristics, with these demographic characteristics? And why is that important for understanding the overall context of your study? You may also do this in more of like a participant sketch or sort of a narrative form, maybe a couple of paragraphs for each participant that are related to the topic. Okay. And this can work really well in certain cases. The main thing is that if you are going to do this, which, like I said, is perfectly fine, you just want to be careful to maintain their confidentiality. So if there are bits of information, demographic information, other data that are really sort of specific and might be identifying to someone who reads the chapter, you would maybe want to obscure that information in some way or leave it out. Okay. So different options for how to present these characteristics. In data collection, this is another section where you just want to highlight what you planned to do in your methods chapter and what you did in reality in your results chapter. So you talk about how many participants did you have? How many participants did you interview? Did you run a focus group? And how many participants were in the focus group? Did you collect data from 2 interviews per person, or was it just 1? Okay. How did you record the data? Did you audio record? Did you video record? Did you just take handwritten notes? Okay. So you want to be really thorough in talking about all of the steps of data collection. Okay. And again, any variations from the plan that you presented in your methods chapter. Again, it's okay, plans change, but we have to talk about this. Okay. And then we talk about anything unusual that may have happened in data collection. Again, probably all of you are faced with talking about how a global pandemic impacted your research. Every dissertation coming out this year is going to include something related to this, because especially with qualitative research, where we rely so heavily on the in-person face-to-face interview, you know, all of this has been changed. Okay, so we just talk about that. We're really getting to the big key section here, the presentation of results in chapter 4. Data analysis is sort of the final, I would say, introductory section of chapter 4. And in your methods chapter, you likely talked about your plan for analyzing your data. Okay. This is where in your results chapter, you talk specifically through the steps of the data analysis and how you applied the data analysis to your own data. So it's not abstract anymore. It's not, here are the steps of, for example, a thematic analysis that Brown and Clark described, and you go step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's just some sort of abstract thing that you're letting your reader know that, you know, yes, I know what all 6 steps of this analysis are. This is where you apply that to the data you have collected. So this can be a lengthy component of the chapter because you need to show how qualitative data have been reduced down into these categories or themes that you are presenting as your results. Qualitative data collection yields a lot of textual data, qualitative data. And the goal of data analysis is ultimately data reduction. We're looking for patterns across participants, across data. Okay, what were those important aspects of whatever your topic is, whatever the phenomenon is that you are investigating? What are the important aspects that most of your participants talked about? Okay, so you're reducing all of these transcripts down into these essential categories. And you need to talk about how you move from the transcripts to the codes to the larger categories that you've identified. Okay. So in data analysis, though, and again, you know, I have another presentation on data analysis, so this is a much more high level, but you also want to include here how you have handled any discrepant data or negative cases, okay, disconfirming cases. Discrepant cases are those where you, let's say, just for sort of ease of discussion, you have 10 participants and you've got this category, you've got this theme that is well supported. 9 of your participants, 9 of the 10, all seem to think about their experience in the same way. And then you have the 10th participant who experienced that in a totally different way. How do you handle that? Okay. Well, this is where you talk about it, right? So generally here, you would talk about how, you know, as you were analyzing data, you were looking for discrepant cases. Discrepant cases are really interesting and important because they tell us something about the variation of experiences. There's nothing negative about it, but you want to make sure that your readers know that you have considered discrepant cases. And then when you present your results, if you're presenting by themes, whichever that theme is, where you have identified this discrepant case or the participant who had a totally different experience or perception of the experience than other participants did, then you talk about that a little bit more and why that person had those differences and what they had to say about it. So this is the bulk of the chapter, your presentation of the results. Okay. And again, you know, I've compiled this list of sections from a lot of different school checklists and templates that I've seen over the years. So not all of them will be required by your school. Okay. At a minimum, this is the section that goes into your results chapter. Okay, you present your results. You can do this in different ways. And it really, you know, I can't give you sort of a good answer specifically for your own work because it has to do with your own, what makes sense for your own study. You can organize your results based on research question. You could also organize your results based on the category or the theme. Whoops. Sorry about that. Let me get back here. So again, it really has to do with what makes the most sense for your own study. It is going to have to do with what type of analysis you performed on your qualitative data, how you go ahead and present. Okay, but you can organize or present your results in either way, and they're totally fine. Okay. When you are presenting data, you should be using mostly your own words. Okay. This qualitative data, this is really sort of best presented in narrative form. You are presenting the narrative. Okay. So most of what you're presenting should be your own. However, you want to use supporting quotes or excerpts from documents, maybe photographs from observations, or if you did something a little bit more creative with participants and had them maybe take pictures of their experiences, you want to support all of your assertions with data. So just as in any other piece of academic writing, just as in your chapter 2, okay, or your literature review or your introduction, anytime you make a claim, you have to be able to support that with evidence. And this is what you're doing here. You're supporting your claims, in this case, the results, with evidence. Okay, so you discuss the data and you interpret the data if appropriate. And the reason why I say interpret if appropriate is the interpretation in most qualitative studies does not happen until the discussion chapter. So there's the presentation of the results where you just present, here is my case, here is my evidence. And then in chapter 5, you discuss it all. There are some types of qualitative studies, namely interpretative phenomenological analysis, where the interpretation is integrated into the presentation of the results. So it may be the case that you do some interpretation there, but again, it depends on your design and your analysis, but you want to discuss your data. Okay. And this should all be presented in a clear and logical manner. You're laying out your results. You are supporting your results with the evidence. Again, we come back to this idea of holding your reader's hand. You don't want anything to be a surprise. You don't want your reader to be confused at all. Okay. So one way to sort of help out with this is, thinking if I were reading this, what would make the most sense to me as far as outlining and presenting the chapter, and then maybe going with that. So back to the presentation of these discrepant cases or negative cases, this is where we talk about them. So in the data analysis section before the presentation, this is where we talk about how we handled any of those cases. Here is where we talk about those cases. Okay, so again, these are cases that sort of seem like they might disconfirm our findings, our results, that everybody had the same perception of an experience except for one or maybe two people. We talk about this at the level of the category or subcategory or theme or sub-theme, okay? Because it's not likely that one participant is going to go against, every other participant. It's more likely that in a couple of ways, their experience was different. And these are important for understanding, again, variations in the experience. They also point us to alternate explanations. So these may be really helpful then for thinking through what further work needs to be done. So when you get to chapter 5, you've got some ideas. Okay, what does this help with in terms of our understanding? What does this point to in terms of the kind of work that we need to continue doing? Right? So these are still important, even though it might seem like, oh, why does this person have to be so totally different? They're not. There's just a lot of variation. We're talking about humans and the human experience. Okay. So again, these get discussed at the level or in the context of the category. So whichever category or level you're talking about, this is where you include information on the discrepant cases. So I mentioned at a couple of points that there are different ways to visualize findings, specifically for demographic characteristics. Like I said, tables can be very, very helpful there for just including a lot of information really clearly, concisely in visual format. But you can use any sort of anything that you can think of really to visualize your findings. Now, it's perfectly fine if your findings are all presented in narrative format and you don't include tables or figures or maps or drawings or anything like that. You don't have to, right? And you should use these sparingly. Okay, use them when they make sense. Don't go overboard, and certainly don't lean on them to present what you need to be presenting in the chapter. Okay, don't think that you can get away with presenting a figure when, it's really something that you could get 2 pages worth of writing out about. So tables, figures, maps, drawings. Again, anytime you use these, you have to introduce them and describe them in the text. They cannot stand alone in the chapter. They cannot stand alone anywhere in your dissertation. So you have to introduce them. What is this figure about? Why is this map important? What does it show? And then you can present it. Okay. So, really my advice, again, to boil it down with sort of these visual tools would be use them sparingly. Don't lean on them, and always make sure that you introduce and describe them. Some of you will also be required to include a section on how you established the trustworthiness of the data. Okay, this is different in qualitative research than it is in quantitative research, although there are some sort of analogous categories here. So trustworthiness, and again, this might be something that you had to outline in your methods chapter, and we're going to revisit it again in your results chapter. But credibility, you want to talk about how you established confidence in the accuracy of your findings. Okay. And so one way to do this might be triangulation. And that means, well, it means a couple of different things, but most often we think of it as using different data sources. And we can think of them as almost sort of corroborating evidence. Okay. I do want to be clear, triangulation in this case, the tri doesn't mean 3. So you don't need to feel like you have to have 3 sources of data. Okay, 2 would be fine. More than 3 would also be fine. But if we have multiple sources of data and those all converge around similar ideas, then we can be fairly confident that our findings are accurate. Okay. Transferability is another aspect of trustworthiness. So can the findings be applied to other contexts? Do they make sense in other contexts? And so one way to establish this is by using rich description of not just the methods, but also the findings as well, so that another researcher can come along and see if the findings are transferable to another maybe population or another geographic location or another maybe job industry. Okay. Dependability, and you can, I think you can probably see, if those of you who know quant, that how these are sort of similar. Some of them are similar. Dependability is, are the findings consistent with further replication of the study? And so here, in this case, another way to establish this is this rich description, providing sufficient information so that the study can be replicated by someone else. The use of an audit trail, where you keep really a research log of everything that you've done and the decisions behind what you've done, your thinking along the way. So someone else can read this and replicate it, okay, and see if those findings are consistent. So it's related to transferability, certainly. And then confirmability. So this has to do with sort of researcher neutrality, or being able to kind of check biases, ensuring that the findings are based on what participants said. Okay. Again, in something like an interpretative phenomenological analysis, the findings are based on what the participants say, but they're also based on their interpretation of an experience, and then the researcher's interpretation as well. So neutrality might be less important in specific designs and analyses. Okay. But we, on the whole, want to make sure that our findings come directly from what our participants say. And so we can use something like member checking, where we generate the results and then have our participants review these, talk to our participants about our findings. We can ask them more questions about, do the findings reflect your experience? Have them talk a little bit more about that, and that can help establish confirmability. Okay, so again, this is where you describe, different from your methods chapter, how you are going to do something. In this chapter, in the results chapter, this is where you talk about how you did establish trustworthiness. And the last section of your results chapter is your summary. You want to highlight the findings again, right? What's the elevator pitch? Okay, you've got a minute to tell somebody what was important about your study and what you found. Highlight these in the summary. Okay, paint a picture for the reader of your findings. And then you want to provide a transition into the next chapter, which probably for most of you will be the discussion chapter. And so this is, you're transitioning from the presentation of the results to the discussion and interpretation of the results. And so you want to talk about that a little bit more in the summary. Okay. And then you're done. But some of you may have other questions, like, well, these sections are all really great. I'm glad to know what needs to go into my results chapter, but oh my gosh, I can't even get started. I know that that's some of you. It was me for a really long time when I was working on my dissertation. So this question of, where do I start when I don't know what to do? Okay. I am willing to bet that a lot of you haven't written consistently since you drafted your dissertation proposals. And I'm also willing to bet that for some of you, that was months, and let's admit it, maybe even years ago. Okay, because there's that gap that happens between the proposal and the defense and the data collection. And in that time, we tend to get out of the habit of writing. And it's really hard to get started again once we're out of the habit. It takes a lot of discipline. Okay. Don't wait for the motivation to come. It's never going to find you. I'm sorry, that's not how motivation works. You've got to go get it. You have to just be disciplined. Okay. So a couple of ways to do that. You do not have to start at the beginning. You are a grown-up. You are writing your own dissertation, and there's nobody telling you that you have to start with the introduction to your results chapter. Absolutely nobody. Okay. So, in fact, a lot of times your introduction is easier to write once you have the other sections in place. Okay. So, don't think that you have to start by introducing your chapter. Okay. If you're feeling really good, you might feel like you can handle starting to draft some of the actual results. And so maybe say, okay, I'm going to write up my first theme today. And that's awesome. If you can do that, go with it, right? Just let it go. Okay. Write, do it. But sometimes you're going to have days where you have to go with the low hanging fruit. Demographic section. Okay. Sometimes it's just kind of like busy work to make a table, pop that demographic information in there. And it seems really easy. You could do it like with the television on in the background, or if your kids are screaming around you, it's the real easy stuff. But what's great about it is that it's a section that still needs to be done. And it is a measurable task that you will have completed. So even if it seems like, oh, well, gosh, I did the demographic section and I wanted to draft 3 themes today, you still got something done. Okay. So start small or start big, depending on how you're feeling, right? No one is telling you where you have to start. I also highly recommend free writing and brainstorming. And these are things that can be done if you give yourself 15 minutes a day. I'm absolutely 100% serious about this. So some of you might be fortunate enough to have maybe an office on campus or a study carrel or somewhere quiet where you can write. And some of you are probably laughing out loud at me right now behind your muted microphones at the suggestion that you have anywhere quiet to work because you have kids who are doing school from home and all of this. But if you can sneak off somewhere with your computer for 15 minutes and just let yourself write about your topic and about your results, you can generate a lot of words and a lot of pages. Do this without censoring yourself. Don't worry about your spelling. Don't worry about your grammar. Don't worry if it seems on topic or off topic. Ideally, yes, it's related to your results, but just get words down. You, at the end of 15 minutes, will have so much to work with. It's not all going to be good. In fact, you might do this for a couple of days and decide that it's all garbage and toss it. But I'm willing to bet that more often than not, you will find really good stuff in there when you go back, and you can start working that into the chapter. So don't be afraid to get started is really my overall advice, right? It's intimidating. It's scary. I think there's also an element to it that you're getting so close to the end, and then what, that holds us back. But start with something really, really simple. Start with something really small and just go for that. Okay. And you'll be making progress really quickly. Okay. I can't tell you how helpful the free writing and brainstorming were for me when I was working on my own dissertation. Just to have some uninterrupted time where I didn't censor what I was writing. It didn't have to be perfect. Some of the best advice that I read when I was working on my dissertation was, first you make a mess, then you clean it up. You are not writing your published dissertation right now. You are writing the garbage draft that's going to get cleaned up later on. Okay. So it doesn't matter if the grammar's bad, if the spelling's bad, none of that matter. You just got to get the content down. Okay. If after that you do find yourself in need of more support, we are here for you. Okay. So again, for those who came in a little bit late, I'm Rachel, I'm Qualitative Mentor. Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company, and we are dedicated to helping graduate students finish their degrees in a timely manner. Okay, we provide a complimentary consultation. So information is here, the phone number, email address. It's also, I believe, in the chat box for you. If you want to get scheduled for that, talk to Janine a little bit more about what we can do for you, where you're at, where you're struggling, what is your relationship with your chair like, what are the sticking points, okay? And really kind of tailor a plan to help get you done, right? So that information is here. And again, you will receive a webinar, a copy of the webinar and the presentation slides. So you can access this whenever you need to. I'm going to open up the question and answer box and get some of these answered right now. So the question is, if I did a mixed method study for the descriptive statistics, do I need to create two separate tables for the larger sample that I examined for the quant section and another table for the smaller subset of participants that were interviewed for the qual section, or will one descriptive table for the entire sample suffice? I think you are probably going to be okay with just one table in this case. If it's a mixed methods and you've got a subsample or a subsample of a subset of, sorry, of the larger, overall sample in your study, I think that, one table should be sufficient. And I think that you could just denote somewhere in that table which were the participants who were part of that smaller subset. Are there other questions that I can help out with this afternoon? I'm not seeing any in the question answer box. To those putting thanks into the chat, you are most welcome. It is our pleasure. We're here for you. We're here to help out. So, anything that we can do, you can give us a call, email, and get set up, that way so that we can see how we can help you out. I do have a question, just came in. Oh, on the non-traditional. Yep. So the question is, my dissertation is not the traditional chapter dissertation. I'll present two publishable papers. This is really common. And I think there are a lot of really good reasons to do this. So the question is, I have lots of data. How can I consolidate all of my findings? Right. So this is a little bit, this can be a little bit trickier. I think that I'm imagining you probably have a couple of different research questions if this is the case. And so I would maybe think about presenting around research questions. So if you have a paper dedicated to one, dedicated to two, you could go about it that way. But ultimately, it's going to really be distilling down those data. So you're not going to be able to present in the same way that you would sort of the traditional results chapter, but the results section of a journal article will still very likely be sort of the bulk of that article. So it's just a matter of working within the word limit, certainly. other questions I can help out with? Well, thanks for being here this afternoon. Thanks for the great questions. You will receive a copy of this within the next day. I do hope that it was helpful. You can do this. You are capable. Just start small, right? What's the phrase? How do you eat an elephant, right? Just bite, bite, bite. Just start small and you'll get there. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.